Good evening, C3 parents, and welcome to another chat. Okay, tonight we are actually going to talk about raising our kids. Just as a side note, my streaming service streaming app that I always use kind of crashed on me tonight, so I am not going to play the intro, unfortunately. So we're just going to dive right into the conversation. Right. So, what is it like to raise an LGBTQI plus child? Now, I do not have an LGBTQI plus kid, not that I'm aware of yet. Um, However, I was raised within a household or family where I have siblings that are LGBTQI plus, and the processes that we had to go through and the thinking that we had to go through. So I'm going to touch a little bit on that today. Is yes, we are in Pride Month. We're in the middle of Pride Month, almost at the end of Pride Month. And it is extremely important that we as parents actually have an honest conversation about this. So often we feel a bit overwhelmed, especially when we feel our family that we're raising is going against the norm, or what we think of as the norm, the mainstream. And immediately the family becomes an outlier, and then we as parents sometimes find it difficult to find our footing again. And if we don't know how to approach conversations regarding sexuality, gender orientation, those kind of conversations with our kids, being open and honest about it with our kids, it can feel like for one thing, your child might actually feel that they cannot trust you and they cannot communicate that information to you, number one. And number two, it also puts us a bit on the back foot, because I'm going to be very honest, every single parent, the day that you find out you're pregnant, you want this baby, and you wanted this pregnancy, um, the moment you actually start expanding your family, any parent that says that they do not have these visions has either done an incredible amount of deconstruction of how they were raised, or they're lying to you. Most of us, when we hold our child for the first time, it is not necessarily active. Okay, at this age they're going to get married, but we have certain dreams and ideals and hopes for our kids. And whether we want to admit it or not, and as much as we want to say, okay, fine, we're raising our kids as a blank canvas and let them difficult to mute those dreams and hopes and desires for our kids while they're growing up. And we do it, those hopes and desires influences how we engage with our kids and how we raise them, and where we encourage and where we like discourage. um in general, if you're an open-minded parent, if you're a creative parent, if you're a connected parent, if you're actually conscious about how you raise your kid, you will catch those. I failed as a specific on a specific sport, therefore my child has to succeed in that sport kind of mentality. You can catch yourself when you get into that mode, and you can stop giving that message to your kid, and you can back off. But often, a lot of parents actually feel, in a sense, we have dreams, we have hopes, we have certain ideals and challenges, and then our kid either gets diagnosed with something different, or they come and they say, hey mom, hey dad, you know what, I ain't cisgender. I guess I'm not on the same page as you regarding gender identity. And as a parent, we immediately, even if we are open minded, some of us actually have a bit of a, okay, how do I handle this? How do I step into this conversation? How do I realign? And the reason we have this moment is because these dreams and hopes that we had are being challenged. And it's a normal reaction, even if you are completely open and unbiased regarding LGBTQI plus community, and you're an ally and you're supportive. Still, when you have that conversation with your kid, you have that pause, not because you're not going to support your kid, but because you get challenged by the hopes and the dreams, and then you get challenged by the reality. The reality for LGBTQI plus kids specifically is they are most generally a target or being ostracized by their peers because they are not mainstream. The behavior is not mainstream. Their interests often are not mainstream, or what is expected of the gender they're supposed to identify as, which makes it difficult for people to relate to. And especially in a world that feels like it's all of a sudden just geared to destroy the LGBTQI plus community, we as parents immediately feel that heartache of my kid, I love you to the ends of the world. And this is going to make it a little bit harder, or not just that little bit, quite a lot harder, because now you're up for challenges that I, as a parent, might not be geared properly, like don't necessarily have the toolkit to support you with. And I'm going to have to rethink many things of how I approached conversations with you, how I approached um, things with you. Now, many parents lately have been trying to raise their children gender neutral, and to a certain extent, we can, we achieve that. Reason being is we want our children not to fall onto it within the societal pressure of what is the role of a woman and what's the role of a boy, and are you really, like, we don't want that for our kids. But the outside world still genders people, still try to put people in boxes, because society struggles to function if they don't have very specific boxes. And let's be honest, the conversation of gender fluidity and sexuality, okay, sexuality has been a conversation for a very long time, but still, it was still a very binary conversation. You had lesbian and you had gay. um, that was it was always been a binary conversation. And in the past 5 to 7 to 10 years, the conversation has evolved into being more open for fluidity, for the identification, for understanding that the biology and the, I almost want to say that the flesh suit and the soul suit doesn't correlate with each other, that there is so many intricacies that even an ally, even a parent that really tries to stay up to date, that tries to stay within the conversation and learn and share and care, can feel lost. um, it can honestly be a situation where we feel, but how am I going to support you, because I struggle to get, it. So here's the reality: you don't need to get nothing, except you need to get your kid. And by getting your kid, what I mean is you need to love them, you need to support them, and you need to be aware of certain risk factors. Children that fall on the LGBTQI plus within that community really seek acceptance. And because of the mainstream society that makes acceptance sometimes in your face, you're loved, you are accepted, it's just great. And then the next moment you're rejected, your sexual identity is being used as a slur, you're being immediately ostracized, immediately treated like a criminal, certain labels are being like doused on you. It is a constant flux of how we live our lives. LGBTQI plus kids are at a 50, like at a risk of 50%, statistically 50% of LGBTQI plus community members do suffer from depression, if not more so. 3 out of 5 actually walk around with generalized anxiety because of not knowing. Imagine having to walk out your front door, like your home is your harbor. If your parents are accepting, like if you grow up in a home that accepts you for who you are and, gets with the program, helps with the research, helps with the support, and fights for you. If you're in a safe home, The moment you step out of that front door, you do not know, whenever you meet someone, whether they are a safe person or not. You don't know if you need to protect yourself or can share yourself. This constant stress on a child, that's to know like where they're going, where they fit in, how they fit with everything. All of that matters, and we need to understand that that creates anxiety. So 3 out of 5 LGBTQI plus people or children part of a community suffers from generalized anxiety. Here's the sad part: 1 out of 8 LGBTQI plus kids attempt self-harm to the end, to the point where it is ending their own lives. That is where it leads to. A half of the trans community successfully do the self-harm that leads to the end of their lives. Why is it that? Because life outside feels like it is on, they have to be constantly on defending themselves of who they are. So what can we do as parents? I did drop in the description down below. I did drop a few links that you can read up. There's an amazing community, the Trevor project, where you can donate, you can support, you can learn, you can read up. I always say if my kid feel like they have to come out to me, I've made a mistake somewhere in the way that I raise my kids, because flesh suit, soul suit can become to be two different identities. Kids don't choose who they fall in love with. We live in a community and in a world where a lot of people will say, yeah, but having a conversation about sexual identity and relationships, like the LGBT, like the different relationships and different how relationships can look, can be very confusing for a young mind that is still developing. But here's the reality: that young mind that is still developing, if we do not give them acceptance, if we do not engage them, if we do not give them that freedom to be who they are, we are delaying their brain development. We are delaying their emotional development. We are delaying their development of figuring out where they fit. If you look at the greater scheme of things, the teenager's job is to figure out exactly how society pulses, how it works, where they fit, where they belong, and they're supposed to experiment with certain relationships, with certain things regarding relationships, and challenge things, and they need to explore, and they need to be. If a parent of a teenager tells me, oh no, I don't need to hold my head, like the moment my child leaves that door, go like, oh, let's hope today's gonna be good. If a teenager like a parent of a teenager says that they do not have that, I wonder what my kid's gonna explore today, question in their head, there's a conversation that I need to have with those parents, because then there's something that doesn't fit. Because teenagers are supposed to push, but if you think a toddler pushes boundaries, a teenager is supposed to like push boundaries like crazy. But if you struggle with just a so-called normalized box in which you need to function within society, you can't even figure that out because you don't know if you're being accepted or whether you'll be safe, there is no chance that your child will be able to develop in a healthy way. Then when they finally leave home and finally find a space where they feel safe, then they're going to start doing the work that they were supposed to do while they were teenagers, which means it actually puts them in a higher risk category of risky behavior when they're in their 20s or 30s. Because if you don't have the freedom, once you have it, you're going to expand on it, and you might make decisions or take risks that there's no coming back from. Children know what their attraction is from a very young age. They know that. The attraction phase or relational attraction phase comes about between the ages of 5 to 8, where their brain starts looking at those things, where they will see relationships around them. And when they have to imagine someone being in that kind of relationship with them, they will either pick the same sex orientation, not because they're being indoctrinated, but just because that is how their brain is readying them for their future. So we need to have these conversations so that a child that chooses that, like, has the picture in their brain of the same sex, don't feel like they're broken already at the age of 5 or at the age of 7. They should never feel like they're broken. They should feel like, oh, okay, that's a viable option. Cool. And move on. Therefore, they need to be able to live in a community where they can talk to their parents about those kind of relationships, where they get educated, sex ed, gender ed. They need that education. The same way that heteronormative children need that education. Children need that education because it doesn't confuse them. It gives them tools in their tool belt. The sad reality for us as parents is we were never, when growing up, especially my generation. I'm a very early millennial. Um, we were never really having those conversations. We never were privy. Like, I want to say privy. We were given a heterosexual education at the age of about 13, after all the kids already in any way have had all their stuff, and the boys are mocking the girls about their stuff, but we weren't really educated about relationships can look and how identity can look. We were taught that, so we never had access to that information unless we in particular actually sought out that information. And I think that's where one of the benefits of me growing up in a home where there was LGBTQI plus people in the home could see the damage of growing up in a society where during their school years they were either mocked or teased, or they really had to find a beard or way to stay under the radar so that they could not be destroyed by society and the meanness that can come out of that age group because of the way that parents raise their kids. Here's a funny thing. It's not funny. It's not funny, haha. It's funny, ironic. If I look now at the latest generations coming through, they're very inclusive, and they're almost like they call them the if about and find out community generation. And your bullying, and but the irony is it's becoming more and more of a fringe thing because they are better educated in understanding that someone who is LGBTQI plus isn't a freak of nature. They're just part of nature. They're normal. Their interests and their identity is just not mainstream, but they're still normal. And you see that education coming through, therefore that targeting and all of that kind of minimized. And if you go and look at who's the true bullies of the LGBTQI plus community, who creates the deepest sense of depression, the deepest sense of anxiety for an LGBTQI plus person, it's not the youngest, like the younger generation. It is us. It's our generation and older. We're the bullies on the school ground. We're the mean people. We're the people that kick our kids out of the house because our child does not conform to what my ideals and my dreams. Your child is a person in their own right, and they've got dreams and they've got ideals and they've got an identity and they've got a sexual orientation that's uniquely theirs. And you as a parent have a job to do. You need to go read up on it, whether your child is LGBTQI plus or not. You have a responsibility and a job to do to learn and educate yourself, to become an ally. Being an ally means that we are going to make mistakes. Yes. And as in with every single community, you will have outliers, people that you're like, oh, I don't want to associate with that person. I get that. I'm a Christian. Do you think I want to associate with the amount of church leaders that are actually grooming kids to abuse them in an SA way? No, I don't. No, I don't. But I'm still a Christian. There are outliers in communities. That is the reality. You cannot judge a whole community on the outliers. And don't let social media, especially the so-called conservative social media, um, the bigoted social media and media out there and spokespeople, ruin your relationship with your child, number one, your chances to improve the lives of others. And for the Christians that might come at me for this conversation, if you can show me where in the Bible Jesus said, love your neighbor and love each other as you love yourself, except the LGBTQI plus community, I will gladly, and I know it was Jesus, where Jesus said that, I will gladly then reassess how I view and how I support and what I personally stand for and what C3 parenting stands for. The greatest commandment, Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he looked at the Pharisees and he looked at the Levites and he looked at people sticking to the law. Their cold-hearted abuse of people, their bigoted behavior. And they tried to catch him out because Jesus was revolutionary. And he turned around to them and said, the greatest law of them all was, you need to love your neighbor as you love yourself, and the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole mind. And that was the greatest commandment of them all. And in that great commandment, there is no space whatsoever to treat another creation of God, like another human being that was created in the image of God, like a second-class citizen. There's no rhyme or reason for you to kick your child out. There's no rhyme or reason to condemn a child or a person for their sexual orientation. None whatsoever. And I'll rather stand guilty in front of God for loving too hard, too much, supporting people, fighting for the rights of human beings to be able to live their lives in love and happiness and acceptance, than stand guilty in front of Him for being the reason that someone turned away from God. So that's my side note for the Christians. Right, parents, we're having this conversation of how do I support my LGBTQ plus I plus child. Go to the Trevor Project, go support them, go read up, go get information, read up, learn. If you have questions, there's so many social media personalities that actually focuses on educating and teaching and engaging And some conversations I still struggle with. The most important thing that you can learn, it's the same with breaking down the concept of racism and becoming an anti-racist and trying to prevent teaching your child racist thoughts, is sitting down, shutting your mouth, and listening to the people who are actually affected by that life. It's the same that I say regarding neurodiversity. Listen to what the autistics are saying is abusive. Listen to what the LGBTQI community plus community is saying about inclusion, about belonging, about mattering in this world, so that we can start getting generations where a parent, when their kid comes say, "Hey, mom, I am part of that," I need to take a beat because they need to rearrange all their hopes and dreams for their kid and start panicking about how their kid will fit in and if their kid actually be okay. But where the parent can go like, "Oh, that's cool," and be all right with it. So that they don't have to panic about raising a kid in a world that will harm them. Life is already tough enough. We don't need to make it harder. We don't need to make it harder for our kids, and we don't need to make it harder for our marginalized communities. Go do your homework, go do your research, and become an ally. Come speak up and be part of the conversation. And the best way that if you are straight, if you are cisgendered, and if you are straight or heterosexual or whatever, if you are part of the norm, the best way that you can be part of the conversation is to sit down, zip your lips, learn, and hear. And then whenever you hear bigoted statements, whenever you hear attacks, whenever you hear abuse happening, yes, those locker room jokes are abusive. And I'm guilty. I used to make those jokes even though I had family members, because it took me years to start breaking down. And even now, I still make mistakes. But you need to learn to break it down so that you can educate others. And I'm using this as my opportunity to educate others and directing them to places where you can get proper information and not the fear mongering nonsense that is currently running out there. For those who live in America that actually stumble upon my conversations here, I am sorry that things are going so bad and going backward. I am at a loss at what, because I don't live there, so I can't physically do anything in regards, like I can't go and picket with you, I can't go and protest with you in your spaces. But just know, for the LGBTQI plus community in America and in Ghana and in all the other countries where you are not just being ostracized, but you're actually currently being persecuted and oppressed and abused by the government, by the system, by the political thing, and the LGBTQI plus people that are being abused by people who call themselves Christians or religious. I stand with you. I care for you. And if there's any way that I can uplift your voice, support you, let me know. I will gladly do that. Because you matter. Your lives matter. Yes, you're a marginalized group, which means you're like a little sliver of society, but every person matters. I'm going to get off my soapbox again. Tonight was a soapbox again. Right. Thank you very much for watching. Please stay safe, everybody. Happy Pride Month to my LGBTQI plus followers. I love you all. I appreciate all of you. If you want to engage, you're welcome to drop some chatty chats in the comment box. Like, share, have this conversation, go wild. I'm okay. I can handle the abuse. if there is any abuse coming my direction. Um, but just know that you are loved, that you're loved, you're wanted, and that you matter. And I see you. Stay safe. Cheers.